Now let's begin. Episode 33, Slasher Icons with Scream. This film was directed by Wes Craven in 1996. It follows a horror film-inspired serial killer who terrorizes a charming community and focuses attention on a single young teen. And Wes Craven's all over this episode, as he should be. He created two of the biggest horror franchises of all time with Scream and A Nightmare on Elm Street, plus other films that he started the genres with The Hills Have Eyes. So this guy pretty much dedicated his entire life to the genre of horror, specifically slasher horror. He's highly innovative, very creative, and he helped build the genre by pushing it to boundaries it hadn't gone yet.
Yeah, and there's a reason why two of his movies are on this list. And Scream itself is actually, it's kind of a meta spoof on horror movies. And who better to do it than Wes Craven? It's so ironic because the killer's inspiration for killing is horror movies.
Yeah, that's my favorite part about the movie is it's like the sarcastic horror comedic take throughout the entire film. And it's basically a satire and also a homage to horror films. It's kind of like Cabin in the Woods. Or even you could say that Scream is satire on horror films, whereas Scary Movie is parody. They're kind of one and the same, Scary Movie and Scream. And ironically, Scream's original title was actually Scary Movie, but they changed the title actually after they found out that Janet Jackson's single Scream was coming out. So they changed it to Scream to kind of cash in on that title.
Oh, they capitalized on it.
But I mean, this film is full of characters who are constantly talking about horror films. They're naming characters like Hannibal Lecter. They're talking about like
Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween.
Yeah, they're talking about Tom Cruise. And they're constantly talking about horror tropes, horror cliches. They talk like they're not in a movie, but they actually are in a movie. Their dialogue is also full of horror cliches that make it work in sort of a self-destructive way.
Yeah, and even Jamie Kennedy's character points out all the rules in horror movies, like the virgin survives and the boyfriend is the killer, and all these horror tropes and archetypes that he's always pointing out.
Yeah, sex and drugs will get you killed, and also if you say I'll be right back, then you're automatically going to get killed too.
I'll be right back. Ooh. But this movie, I think its strength is its comedy, because the movie is very scary at times. There are scenes that are pretty terrifying, especially I remember being a kid seeing this and being absolutely terrified by it. But also, it's very funny and very silly and goofy, and it's ultimately a lot of fun. I would say this movie is just a great time.
Yeah, Wes Craven and screenwriter Kevin Williamson, they set up the film so perfectly. Like, the first thing that happens when we turn this movie on is we get that old school Dimension logo, Dimension Films.
I miss that logo.
I miss that one so much. Yeah. And then it's just in blackness with just screaming, and it just gets you into the mood of like you're about to get scared shitless in this film. And we have that opening 12-minute scene with Drew Barrymore and her character Casey being tormented, played with, and then killed by the Ghostface killer. And this scene, it's like, I love opening scenes to horror movies because if they're done right, it really sets the mood. And with Scream, we get a sense of the killer. You know, this guy, he's charming on the phone. He's actually very charismatic. He's clearly intelligent. He's got like an interesting voice, but he's also sadistic, evil, and a merciless killer by what we see with what he does, especially to the boyfriend next to the pool in the floodlights.
Oh, that opening scene is so iconic, and I think it's a really great opening, one of the best in all of horror movies. Drew Barrymore's great in it, but just the idea that someone could be stalking you and is calling your house and tormenting you, that's just terrifying. And when shit does start happening, it gets this scene actually gets very disturbing by the end of it. When we see what the killer ends up doing to Drew Barrymore's character, it's pretty messed up.
Yeah, it's different now when you watch it because everyone has a smartphone and phones are kind of just like part of our lives no matter what. But this
having a portable phone was such a cool thing in the house.
Yeah, but we're talking about where people, if they wanted to call you, that's why they had your number. You weren't getting random calls very often from telemarketers, sometimes wrong numbers. But like, if someone wanted to call you, they're gonna call you.
Yeah. During the filming of this scene, Drew Barrymore actually called 911 for real multiple times by accident because the prop master forgot to turn the phone off. The local police station got several calls from them on set, and they ended up calling the set back asking what's going on, why are they getting so many phone calls.
And also, Drew Barrymore wasn't originally cast in this opening role. She was originally casted as Sidney Prescott, the lead in the film, but she had to drop out to the lead because of scheduling conflicts. And so instead, she wanted to do this opening role because in her eyes, if she did this, then no one would see her getting killed. No one would see it coming because she was such a huge star in 1996 when this came out.
Just like in Psycho, where the lead actress, she gets killed 40 minutes into the movie. You think she's going to be the lead throughout the film, but before the movie hit the halfway point, she's dead. So it has a similar effect to that film.
Yeah, we just get also like the start of this like playful banter about what's your favorite scary movie. And again, this is a theme throughout the entire film. This again is a satire on horror films, but they embrace it. They embrace the tropes. They embrace the cliches. And this serial killer, Ghostface Killer, is also inspired by a real serial killer called the Gainesville Ripper, who terrorized teens in a college town in Florida.
I remember how popular that costume was when these films were coming out. Like, everyone was Ghostface for
You're
1 year.
Ghostface.
Yeah, everyone did it at least once for Halloween.
But for like a decade and a half, maybe because Scream lasted for like 4 movies throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, but then Scary Movie made it popular again too, so it kind of revitalized
It had 2
that
franchises.
icon. Yeah, it revitalized the icon of Ghostface.
And then there was that famous "What's up" commercial. What's up?
I remember I had a Scream mask, or we had one where it was like a clear mask in front of the mask where blood poured out, so you could squeeze a button.
Oh
and,
yeah,
like,
I
blood
remember
would
that.
stream down the face of it.
Yeah, that was a good one.
But everyone was obsessed with Scream, and Ghostface was the most popular costume for so long.
They actually originally designed Ghostface's costume to be all white because they wanted him to look like a ghost, but they ended up thinking that it looked too much like a KKK.
Way too much.
So they ended up going with a black costume with a white mask.
This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast is brought to you by our friends at movieposters.com, who supplied us with these awesome movie posters. I got Gladiator.
I got Pulp Fiction. Check it out.
So thank you, David, at movieposters.com for hooking it up with these. They'll also be sponsoring our next giveaway, so look out for that soon. Use coupon code Raiders15 to get 15% off your order. Movieposters.com is the #1 site to get movie posters. They have been for decades and years. If you love movies as much as us, I highly suggest checking them out to get your next poster. They have everything from original designs, framing, backlights, canvases, even plaque design. Again, Raiders15 for 15% off your order at checkout at movieposters.com. And again, that opening scene, we get a sense of the entire film. We understand pretty quickly the character of the serial killer, and we know what we're in for the rest of the film. And one of the great strengths of Scream is the characters are very memorable. They're well acted, well written. Sidney, Billy, Stu, Randy, Gail, Dewey, Tatum, they're all iconic horror characters that you still think of to this day.
Especially for Courtney Cox, this was a big... Everyone knew her as Monica from Friends, who's a pretty nice and cool person. I think seeing Courtney Cox playing a bit of an asshole, like a bloodthirsty news reporter, just trying to gain as much fame as possible, a new way to look at her in this movie. And then Neve Campbell just blew up from this movie.
Yeah, Neve Campbell is Sidney Prescott. She's clearly one of the most iconic female characters in horror of all time, and she's, up there in the ranks of Scream Queens with Jamie Lee Curtis for sure. She gives a great performance. She's probably the best actor in Scream, hands down.
Oh, absolutely.
She does the best job out of everybody.
It's honestly not even close.
And Neve is just incredibly relatable to an audience. She seems like that girl next door. She could be anybody, somebody you know, someone you went to high school with. And again, she's a terrific actress.
Wes Craven did a really great job with building the suspense and mystery about who the killer was, because throughout the film, he places several little hints and clues regarding several characters, because he's trying to keep you guessing, like, who's the killer in this movie. It was very smart of him to have Billy get arrested within the first act of the movie, because if Billy got arrested, then so early in the film, there's no way he's the killer, right? Because, like, there's no way they catch the killer before the movie even kicks off, so it can't be Billy. So it keeps the audience suspicions away from Billy by having him get arrested so early.
Yeah, because he gets exonerated basically because while he's in jail, Sidney gets a call from the killer, and Billy was in jail, so he couldn't have possibly called him. But Craven does a lot of things where, like you're talking about, by avoiding suspicion of characters and putting suspicion on other characters, like even the principal played by the Fonz, he seems kind of sketchy the way he's talking to the kids when they're in trouble in the principal's
with
office.
The scissors, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's playing with the mask.
Yeah, and then the sheriff, even he gets a hint or a potential cop, because Craven does this very noticeable close-up of the boots of the sheriff, which are almost identical, or if not identical, to the killer of the Ghostface killer. And
I looked at it; it's pretty close. They're not identical, but they're very similar.
Yeah, very similar. And to me, when I see that, I'm like, oh, he's probably trying to make it seem like, is it the sheriff or is it another cop? Maybe it could be Dewey.
And then Dewey is basically the most useless cop in the history of policing.
Horrible cop, by the way.
I think
terrible.
I think, did Wes, do you think he made him this way in this film to poke fun at the fact that cops never do anything in slasher movies?
I think so, yeah, because he's clearly just comic relief.
Completely useless.
And then Doofus in
Special Officer Doofy
in a Scary Movie is just the most hysterical parody of it I've ever seen in my life.
But like Sydney gets a phone call from Ghostface when she's at Rose McGowan's house, and then they hang up, and then Dewey comes out in the hallway with his gun.
It's like, what are you gonna shoot?
What are you doing, man? He's such a bonehead in this movie. Going back to that opening scene with Drew Barrymore, in order to keep her hysterical and on the verge of tears, Wes Craven would constantly tell her horrible stories about animal cruelty because she's a big animal lover in real life. And so he terrorized her by telling her these stories in order to keep her emotional during the filming of the scene.
Throughout Scream, this town is being terrorized by this serial killer, and we don't know who it is, but we do know that they love film. They're inspired by horror films. We do know that they have to be a local because of the knowledge they have of the town and where local high school students live. Probably a high schooler themselves because of the killing of the principal. And this is all connected somehow to Sidney Prescott because she becomes the main target of this killer. The killer, gets its hands wet and dirty and kills a few people here and there, but Sidney's clearly the main goal of the killer.
And also, she has death in her past. Her mother was killed the year previous.
Yeah, so it's lining up to, it's a 1-year anniversary from when her mother was viciously killed, and Sidney helped put a man away in prison for it with the testimony that is questioned by Gail Weathers, the reporter who was writing a book about Sidney's mother and her murder. And Sidney helped put away character Cotton Weary for the death of her mother, who was having an affair with her. That's the rumor that Gail's trying to report. But Sidney insists that Weary raped her mother and killed her viciously. And Weary's played by Liev Schreiber, who we don't really see except for on TV.
Gail is arguing that Sidney put an innocent man behind bars because of her testimony against him, which could have been false.
Yeah, so Sidney has to kind of deal with this internal conflict of, is what she said accurate? Is it flawed? Is it biased because she wanted someone to catch her killed? Did she not want to admit the flaws of her mother in terms of having an affair and sleeping around with other men? And we're also dealing with Sidney's social life and her friends, including boyfriend Billy, played by Skeet Ulrich, who was cast in the role partly because he looks a lot like Johnny Depp in Nightmare Before Elm Street.
It's crazy how much this guy looks like Johnny Depp.
Ulrich's a good-looking dude, not gonna lie. And so Billy has that cliche suspect vibe about him the whole entire film. He looks like a bad boy. Looks like he doesn't really care about anything except for trying to get in Sidney's pants. But the first time you see this movie, in your head, even though he's been exonerated, there's no way that Billy isn't the killer. He has the killer vibe, just like Randy suspects, because Randy's like, he's got killer written all over him. Because Randy is like that meta character who is the expert on horror films. He's playing horror films. He knows all the rules about horror movies. He knows who the killers should be, who the suspects are. Everybody's a suspect. Don't have sex. He's never been so lucky to be a virgin before. This episode of Raiders of the Lost podcast is also brought to you by Manscaped, the leaders in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your comfort, obsesses over technology developments to provide you the best tools for your grooming experience. Manscaped's been super generous. They sent us their performance packages, which features their luxury lawnmower groomer, as well as toners, deodorants, shirts, and boxer briefs. Get 20% off your order and free shipping using coupon code Raiders of the Lost at checkout. Again, Raiders of the Lost at checkout for 20% off your order and free shipping. Grooming's a necessary part of life, everybody. This shouldn't be exclusively an ad for men. If you got a boyfriend, father, brothers, siblings, cousins, you need a gift for this holiday season, I highly suggest Manscaped. This is stuff that we actually want. I'm telling you, any guy would freak out if they got something from Manscaped. Really suggest it for gifts this holiday season.
He's talking to us, the audience, when he's talking to other people. You know what I mean? And then this all culminates into, it's a teen movie, so there's going to have to be a big party. Even though the town's in quarantine because of a serial killer.
This is a huge plot hole for me. The town's in lockdown. There's a serial killer on the loose. Kids are getting killed like every single night, but they're having a huge house party. Officer Dewey is dropping off his sister Tatum and Sidney Prescott to a house party.
With underage drinking.
With the underage drinking, and he's a cop. And then he shows up at the party with Gail Weathers like, oh, I'm the cool guy. I'm going to hang out and drink beers. He's drinking a beer with these kids. What kind of cop is this guy?
Awful cop.
Or, I mean, he could be the coolest cop. Who knows? And, of course, this house party is going to be the scene of the climax and the crazy twist ending, the big reveal of who the killer is. If you haven't seen it, I suggest skipping ahead a little bit if you haven't. The killer is Stu and Billy, spearheaded by Billy because Billy's mother left Billy and left town and skipped town on him because Sidney's mother was having an affair with his father. And so Billy was abandoned as a child by his mother. And this raged him and filled him with so much anger and hate and the desire to kill Sidney. And he's the one who killed Sidney's mother. And he hasn't finished his job until he gets to kill Sidney Prescott, too.
And the reason why it seems to be that Ghostface can show up at multiple points during an attack is because it's actually two of them being Ghostface at the same time.
Which is Ghostface calls Sidney when Billy's in jail. Mm-hmm. And also, I think once you've seen this movie a bunch of times, we were just talking about the garage scene and how, like, that scene is full of Ghostface. Like, he's very clumsy. He's getting, like, destroyed by a fridge door. Like, and then Rose McGowan does, like, a jiu-jitsu move. She's throwing bottles at him. He's falling down all over the place. I think if you watch it a bunch of times, you can tell when Billy's Ghostface and when Stu's Ghostface, because Stu is very silly and goofy and clumsy, but Billy, he's been, playing this for so long. He seems like very intent, and he executes his kills perfectly, like in the first one.
Oh, I think you're right.
Killing.
Absolutely.
So I think you can kind of spot who Billy is when he's Ghostface and who Stu is. And I think Billy is also the Ghostface in the bathroom. He misses out on Sidney there, but then he very effectively kills the principal.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think you can tell who's who.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that leads to that probably the most famous scene in the movie is when Billy and Stu reveal everything to Sidney, and then they start stabbing each other. It's
a pretty smart plan. Their plan is to frame Sidney's father for the murders of everybody and doing all the killing in the town because, of course, it's a horror movie. So at the beginning of the film, Sidney's father leaves on a business trip for a couple days, which leaves his teenage daughter home alone for a couple days. Obviously, I mean, it's the
setup, man.
You gotta embrace
it's a beautiful home.
You gotta embrace those tropes. And so they have him tied up and kidnapped, and they're going to frame him for all the murders. They're going to kill Sidney, and then they stab themselves a few times to make it seem like they survived the attack. And then we have the great lines by Stu, who's getting stabbed way too many times by Billy. He's like, I'm freaking dying here, man.
Getting a little woozy here, Billy.
My mom and dad are going to be so mad at me.
Yeah, Matthew Lillard actually improvised all of those lines. Wounding themselves makes them susceptible to what happens next when Gale shows up with a gun. And when they incapacitate Gale, Sidney's gone. Which makes you think that if they had just waited to stab each other after they killed everyone, it would have been way more effective.
But it wouldn't give Sidney the chance to do my favorite thing in the movie, which is now she becomes the killer. She puts on the Ghostface costume. She starts to call and torment and play with the killers because now she's the killer.
And then Stu's talking to her on the phone. He's like, did you really call the police?
I'm feeling woozy here, man.
And then Sidney fucks them up. She smashes the TV on Stu's face and then stabs Billy with an umbrella.
And then shoots him in the head after Randy points out there's always going to be a second scare by the killer at the end of the movie.
One last scare. But yeah, this movie is so much fun. It's a great time. Every time you see it, it's scary, it's funny, the cast is great, and then it's fun to watch Wes Craven just poke fun at the genre he helped build.
And not just poke fun at it, it's a celebration of the horror genre, it's a celebration of the slasher genre, and this film basically resuscitated the slasher genre from the dead because all slasher films became like B-rated, straight to video, blockbuster rental movies rather than being shown at the movie theaters, but Scream brought the genre back to life.
Yeah, and I think right after this, I Know What You Did Last Summer came out.
And that was, I mean...
The guy kills everyone with a hook.
Is that Freddie Prinze Jr.?
Yeah, and Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Yeah, I mean, Freddie Prinze Jr. is in the movie. It's not going to be that good.
But I really like Scream, and it's a great movie, I think.
I think it's my favorite movie on this list. There's a great Wes Craven cameo in this film. He plays the janitor. When right before the principal gets killed, he makes a noise and then he looks out in the he hears a noise, looks out in the hallway, and there's a janitor mopping. And it's Wes Craven, and he's wearing a very similar outfit to Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, he's wearing a green and red striped sweater, and even the principal says, "Oh, not you, Fred."
These are the 4 rules officially that Randy lists out for horror movies. 1, you will not survive if you have sex, if you drink or do drugs, if you say "I'll be right back," and everyone is a suspect. And the script pretty much adheres to all of these rules with some exceptions. And some characters even press their luck throughout the film. And this is because Craven wants to toy with the audience's expectations. And one of my favorite scenes in the movie is there's the scene where half the party's gone out, and then Randy's leading like a horror movie marathon with some high schoolers, but then he ends up being the only one left in the room. And we get shots of a TV, the reflection of the TV with Randy watching it. And he's watching Halloween, and in the scene, Randy's pleading with Jamie Lee Curtis, "Turn around, Jamie, he's right behind you." And in the actual room, Ghostface is creeping up right behind Randy. And the joke also works on another level because both Kennedy and Jamie Lee Curtis are named Jamie.
Ah, funny. The producers actually originally did not like the Ghostface mask and actually requested that the filmmakers film Drew Barrymore's opening scene with several different kinds of masks, but the filmmakers refused to do it and implied that if you wait and watch the scene when we finish it, you'll like it. And then when they finished the scene, they sent it to the producers, and they ended up loving it.
Scream is a classic horror film. It's one of my favorite of all time in the horror genre. You got to check it out if you haven't seen it. If you have seen it but you haven't watched it in a while, put it on this weekend. You're going to love it. It's a great time. It's hysterical. It's terrifying. The gore is great. The characters are rich. It's just a fun time. We also have a Patreon now, so you can check us out there and support us monthly. Each patron gets specific perks, including a personalized video sent to you, as well as monthly shout-outs on the podcast by top-tier patrons.
And that Patreon, we're using the money to buy new things for the set. We got new microphones coming in. We got these wardrobes, things for our desks. So we put the money from our Patreon to good use on the show.
Yeah, we're investing everything we have into the show to make it as good as possible for you all listening and watching at home.